This is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host. We have with us a returning guest, Dr. Lawrence Reed. He is the author of the book, Was Jesus a Socialist? He's also President Emeritus of the Foundation of Financial Education. And guys, we've had a real good response to his first interview. A lot of good comments and questions too. So I wanted to bring him back so we can get some of those questions answered, but I also wanted to bring him back to sort of, for me to say directly to my listeners and supporters, buy the book. This is a very important book, extremely important. And let me tell you why I think it's important. Before we have Dr. Reed start talking. More and more I'm seeing young people seem to be attracted to this whole democratic socialist idea. And as a fact, there's one quote here I've got where the person says, if anyone was ever a socialist, it was Jesus, and that was from a Democratic Socialist of America supporter, very prominent one. There are some people, I've actually had conversations with some people who wanted to make the argument, or making the argument, that Bernie Sanders, the leading, he's a socialist senator from Vermont and DSA leader, that Sanders' economic policies are closer to the teachings of Jesus. And I've had other people, just flat out just say, hey, Jesus was a socialist, period. And if we're not socialist, then we're not in alignment with Jesus' teachings. Now, the rest of the title of Was Jesus a Socialist? Why this question is being asked again, and why the answer's almost always wrong. And I think we sort of missed that part of the whole title, and that's important for us to deal with that. So, brought back Dr. Reed for us to help us deal with that, and also, well, he's not going to say it, but I'm going to say it, by the book. So, Dr. Reed, that last part of the title, why this question is being asked again, you comment on that, and why the answer's almost always wrong.
Corbin, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it very much, and many thanks also to your viewers and listeners who are tuning in. This question of was Jesus a socialist was actually pretty well settled decades ago. This is not the first time this has come up. And every time it does, historically, scholars take a closer look at what he said in the New Testament and come to the conclusion that no, he was not a socialist. He had his mind on other things. He never advocated for the confiscation of wealth. He never supported the compulsory redistribution of wealth or the central planning of an economy or the government ownership of the means of production. And some people say, well, but he was a socialist because he cared for the poor. Well, there's a lot more care for the poor that happens in capitalist countries than there is in socialist countries because there's more stuff to share with them. If Jesus were to come back today and speak to an audience, and if he were to ask any audience anywhere in the world, okay, what did you do for the poor? He would not be impressed if people raised their hand and said, oh, well, we voted for the politicians who promised that they would take care of that. Jesus would say, what? You were supposed to do that. Why are you laundering other people's money through the political bureaucracy and then claiming that somehow the end result is that it will help the poor? You're supposed to do it, not the politicians. So many people thought that question, was he a socialist, was settled. Well, then in recent years, all that was written about before seemed to be forgotten. And socialists started coming out again saying he was a socialist. So we have to answer that question again, because time and time again, it's being answered wrongly. People are saying, oh, yeah, he was a socialist. But that tends to be people who never actually read what he said in the New Testament, because he came to fulfill, for instance, the Ten Commandments. And one of those is thou shalt not covet. And another one is thou shalt not steal. Jesus never said it's okay to covet and to steal if you think you can spend it better than the person who earned it, or if you hire a politician to do it on your behalf, or if you're just absolutely convinced you really want it. I mean, he was no socialist in any respect.
Doc, let me just interject with a couple of questions. As you're talking, and a couple of things came up. There have actually been some people who've said, or maybe not directly, but they've said, hey, if you're poor, it's okay to steal food. Is that something you think Christ would sort of, lean toward? Well, okay, yeah, you're poor, you're hungry, and you decided to steal a couple of apples and all. I'm good with that.
Well, there's no instance of it. There's nothing in the New Testament ever where he sanctions theft. He never says stealing is okay if you really need it, because he knew that theft was inherently wrong and that there is almost always other ways to satisfy an urgent need. In fact, I used to give often to panhandlers in the street. And then I realized, I may not be helping them at all. Any one of them could walk down the street to the Salvation Army and say, I need help. And if they really do need help, I don't know that there's a Salvation Army office or a Red Cross office that would tell a truly needy person, get lost. I mean, there is help available. Or they could go to most churches and say, I'm desperate, will you help me? And chances are they will get help. There's no need to call Washington and expect the politicians to do that. If they do anything, it'll cost 3 times as much, and then they'll use it as a way to buy votes, very cynically, like demagogues.
Yeah, and that led to the other question. And I'm not trying to like put Christ in a box, but it does seem as if, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, let me know if you agree with this or not, it does seem as if it's more efficient for believers to go, to deal directly with, the poor, the orphans and the widows, as you said earlier, is to put like the government between us.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, I think he would. Now, I can't cite a verse where he says or uses that word efficient, but I think he would agree that when you help a person yourself directly, as the Good Samaritan did, it's the most efficient way to get the job done. And also, you find that when people give of their own free will and give directly to people they've come to know as being in need, there's more accountability than you find in a government program, because typically a private giver is going to say, I'd like to help you, I will help you, but not forever. I want to see some improvement on your part. I want to see some changes if they are required on your part. If you need something because of poor choices you've made, well, I'll help you out, but I don't want you to go back to making those poor choices again. But government just sends the checks out, and they don't care whether the behavior that led to the person's problem goes away or is reinforced by the check.
Yeah. Folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host. Check out my website, booktalkwithcorbin.com, where you'll see another interview, great interview that we had with Dr. Lawrence Reed and some other great figures as well. Doctor, I wanted to also just bring up something here. Are you arguing that Christ was a Democrat or he was a Republican or anything like that?
No, I would never do that, because those are terms that weren't even in existence 2,000 years ago when he walked the earth. Those are titles of current political parties in America and have nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. He was interested in things like ideas. He was interested in what's in your heart. And I wouldn't label him with terms that weren't even in existence at that time. In fact, not only do I say he was not a socialist, I also say he was not a capitalist either, because both terms, they came 1,800 years later after Christ walked the earth, and they're so loaded with baggage. People think they know what you're talking about when you throw those terms out, but they may not, because they are subject to so many different meanings. So no, I wouldn't use those labels.
Yeah, and I think this is a person who came out of Harvard University. But he put up a post and he was talking about, he was really condemning the believers of the faith, and saying, hey, your Christianity is aligned with imperialism and colonialism and genocide and the teachings of Joel Osteen, and man, that's no good. That's bad. That's evil. Would you put that kind of criticism, I guess you might say, on the Christian faith?
No, I wouldn't. No, there's a lot in that package to unravel, but to claim that Christianity is somehow in league with imperialist policies or some of the other things that you've mentioned really is to look at the sins of a few Christians and lay them at the feet of Christ himself. I mean, whenever I hear that kind of thing, I say, okay, I agree with you that some Christians were bad people. Isn't that true of any faith? Isn't that true of atheists? I mean, there's no faith in the world whose adherents are all saintly 100% of the time. So that's nothing new, nothing peculiar to Christianity, that some people claim to be Christians but don't behave in a Christian fashion. So anybody who does engage in forceful, purposeless invasions of other people's property or territory, or maybe with a purpose to just take their stuff and throw power around and lord it over people. They may say they're Christian, but they're not doing what Christ himself advocated. He never said that, hey, put the troops in battle and send them out and take over other countries. I mean, he never said that. Right. Now, my guess is that Harvard professor, if he's a leftist or a socialist, I wonder if he would turn that around and apply it to his own philosophy, because I can certainly point to one socialist or communist country after another that was imperialistic. Adolf Hitler was a socialist, and he certainly was an imperialist. The Soviet Empire, in the name of socialism, sent its armies and subversive forces to undermine democratic governments all over the world. So I think that's a red herring to try to claim that that's somehow Christian.
And that it also raises this question, and if you don't feel comfortable answering it, don't. But who was he? Who was Christ?
Well, I would answer that question by starting with who he said he was. He said he was, more than once, plain as can be, he was the Son of God. He was God incarnate. He was sent by God, who is one of the three parts of the Trinity. He was sent as a son to pay the price for the sins of mankind. Then anybody, whether you're a Christian or not, has to take what he says in that regard and then ask themselves, well, do I believe that? And, C.S. Lewis, the great theologian, I thought put it so well when he said there are only three possibilities. Jesus was either Lord, that is to say, he was who he said he was. He's either Lord, or he was a liar, or he was a lunatic. Those are the only three options. And so you have to decide. And it's a great little book, by the way, that I recommend on this. You can read it in an evening by Josh McDowell. And it's called More Than a Carpenter. And oh my gosh, it was it impacted me tremendously. More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. I believe Jesus was who he said he was, and that isn't just sort of some seat of the pants hope. That is rather based on lots of evidence for the resurrection, for instance, which, without the resurrection, there is no Christianity. And I believe the evidence for that is profound. So that's who he was, in my estimation.
He was who he according to your word, he was who he claimed he was.
That's right. And he wasn't, some people say, well, he was just a good teacher. Well, wait a minute. How can you be a good teacher then if you lied to the public about who you really are? Right. You wouldn't say a guy running around saying, I'm the Son of God, but I'm really not. And I'm a really good teacher. No, you're a liar.
Right. You're a really good liar.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's hope and pray that these folks who Democratic Socialists of America,